Happy Friday, everyone. It's week 2, so we're starting Excel Friday. And so very first thing we need to talk about for these Excel assignments, you do need to download the Excel files from Brightspace. I encourage you to do that once you reach the room. I will tell you that I'm using similar files to what I've used in previous years, but I do make minor edits to them every year. So if you just want to be a go-getter, I'm going to download all the Excel files now. They may be slightly different because I do make changes to them the day of. So. But we're not going to be doing anything too profound for the first few weeks, but I do think there's some value in this. Like I said before, if I'm going through this and it seems like that you already know all this information, that's a good thing. Okay, that's a really good thing. That's important to note. If I'm not teaching anything new, then you've already got mastery of this. There will be some content of this that's on the exam, so I encourage you as we're going through these files to work through them and to save your workbooks so that you can review them as you're preparing for the exams. I believe it's only a few multiple choice questions for each exam. I think it's 2 on the first exam and 3 on the second exam. But I do think that learning Excel is important. Excel is one of those things that it's just so critical to have a good understanding. Has anybody watched Cobra Kai on Netflix? Okay, I know I completely diverged topics there. I said Excel, Cobra Kai. Well, so Cobra Kai is actually from the Karate Kid, and Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid was famous for saying, if your balance is good, your karate is good. And I'm going to be the Mr. Miyagi of Excel. I'm going to say if your Excel is good, then your data technology skills are good. It's just really, really easy to make transition there. If you don't understand Excel, then it's much more difficult because everything kind of emanates from that. So that's why I encourage you guys to take kind of the stuff seriously. Like I said, the base stuff that we're going to be learning is going to be very simple things you've been exposed to before, but I'm going to throw in a few tips and tricks that'll be helpful here. And like I said, most importantly, is that I want to put practical applications for everything that we do about situations that you would use these in the real world. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's one thing to know a sum function. It's another thing to say, what would I use a sum function? Which I realize is a really bad example because obvious what you'd use a sum function for. But just insert function here whenever I'm going through that. And you can use that application for everything. So let's go ahead and let's start out with our first one. So we've got an Excel thing here, and you will notice that I've got a class list. This is actually what my class list looks like for every course that I've ever taught. I download this from Brightspace and I create my class roster from this. And obviously, I'm not going to use real student names. I'm going to use instructor names because they're public knowledge, so it's okay for me to tease them. But I don't know everybody's middle name, so I just wouldn't use Harry Potter names for that. And I think this is an appropriate list. If you were curious why I use Voldemort for Dr. Caden, ask somebody who knows Dr. Caden and it becomes obvious. Okay, it becomes obvious. But yeah. These are going to be my students that we're going to be using with banner IDs and the CRNs and all the information. And this is what I would draft information from. This is what I would draft for course roster, grade book information, stuff like that. So we're going to do some pretty basic stuff. It's going to be formatting. It's going to be some basic calculations. We're going to talk about the intuition behind some of the things that we do. Like I said, not only am I going to focus on just some of the important things that you need to know, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about some additional things that you may not know. If it's anything that I talk about, it's basically live for an exam, so it's something that you could take note. So I encourage you to take notes as we're working through this, especially if it's something that you're not familiar with. So the very first thing we're going to note is that I've got 2 sheets here. One of these has got some grades on here with some information, and other one's just a blank sheet. So we can actually use some techniques, some lookups to actually assign our names here. But since this is a sequential list, we're just going to do very basic to start out. We're just going to do a copy and paste. So I want to take my names here and I want to put them into sheet 1. So I'm just going to highlight here. And everybody should know by now, there's ways you can do this. There's multiple ways you can do this through any of the techniques we're going to be using. I do want to reiterate, if I do something a certain way, I probably will not test you on things that have multiple approaches. So for example here, if I want to copy here, I can right click, I can copy, okay, I can right click that. I could go up here, I could click on the copy button right over here. So the copy button right over here. Or what I will likely do in most of the scenarios when I'm copying information, you won't be able to see it, but trust me, it's going on, okay? Because I'm going to be holding down Control C, or Control and hitting C. So we already talked about this already, the holy trinity of Excel, Control C, Control X, Control V. Get really ingrained in using those shortcuts. Those are the shortcuts that you should know. If you know no other shortcuts, those are going to be ones that are valuable. So yeah, we're going to copy the names here, first and last names, and we're just going to paste them over here. And so Control V, you can also press paste. Now we run into our first problem here, and that whenever you copy something in Excel, it will copy all characteristics. All right, and if you're OCD like me, you probably do not want to have all characteristics copied over. You want it to be the format that's listed here. So let's talk about a few ways that we could approach this to fix this particular problem. The first one is one that we already know about. This is from the Excel quiz that we took last week, is that instead of pasting, just hitting Control V, I could just go and say paste, and I want to paste values. And that will paste the information there without any of the formulas underlying it or any of the formatting. So that's one way. That's one way we could approach it. Another way we could approach it is we could just go ahead and Control V it here. And then we say, I really want it to look like the format of all the information here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to click on D1. And I'm just going to click on this little paintbrush here. This is called the Format Painter. And this basically says, I want you to copy the format of the cell that I'm currently on, or the cells that I'm currently on. And then you highlight whatever you want to apply it to. So a few different solutions to the similar problem. No one solution is going to be best, but those are all possible solutions we could have for this particular issue. All right. Again, very, very simplistic stuff. I don't expect you to be too focused on what the answer is, but just making sure that you can come up with an answer that's fairly simplistic and straightforward. If your answer to this problem is I don't know how to copy it, I'm just going to have to type this in manually, you're doing the wrong level of work. Okay, you're going a little bit further when everything we're going to be trying to do in this course, we're going to make it as simple as possible, if not simpler. Okay, because Einstein said that, make everything as simple as possible, if not simpler. Yeah, he didn't actually say that. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Let's go ahead and move over subtotal. By the way, I probably will not be clicking on the save button a lot during these activities because I like to keep the template that I have for the activities set up. But I encourage you, if we stop someplace and I'm talking and you hear me jabbering on about something that's relevant, hit that save button. The best thing you can do is save anything in Excel just to avoid any happenstance. We're going to talk about some disasters here in just a little bit. I will say an Excel disaster is one of the worst kind of technology disasters you can have. Okay, it ranks right up there with the data breach that occurred a couple of years ago, and so it's really, really challenging. So let's go ahead and we're going to do something pretty basic. We're going to do a sum function. So I've got a subtotal here. I'm going to equal sum, not sum. And then we're going to sum the first three rows. Now, there's a few ways you can go about this. These are more technique preferences, but I'd like to talk about a few of them. First of all, you can just highlight the sum series that you want, which I think everybody's pretty much acclimated to that. Something that you may want to get in the habit of is learning about different ways to approach this, the keyboard. So I'm going to show you a quick keyboard method. So I'm going to go over to D2, and then I want to highlight everything from D2 to F2. Does anybody know the key that I would hold down for this? Sure. Yep, Shift. Okay, so hold down Shift, and then I press the arrow to the right, and it highlights those automatically. And then I can close parentheses and do that. Now, I want to make a quick note here. There's always confusion about when you should use Shift and when you should use Control. Shift is when you're going to have adjacent series of anything. So if I'm looking and I want to hold Shift, if I want to capture everything that's down, I'm going to hold Shift, or if I want to capture everything to a certain direction, okay? Control is when you have things that are non-adjacent and you want to capture them all. So if I hold this on D and I can hold Control, then I can capture anything that I select through that. So that's the simple solution about what we'd be doing if we're talking about using Control versus using Shift. And it's not important that you remember that, as long as you remember that you can use both of those to capture disparate data. If you ever forget, then you can just test it out and figure it out on your own. I will only say that because I forget all the time. All right, so I have to remember if I'm going to use Control or I'm going to use Shift in a certain scenario. All right, so a few things we're going to talk about the sum function. The sum function itself, not particularly difficult. I expect everybody in this room knows the sum function pretty well. But let's talk about a few of the characteristics of what we've done. The very first thing is that for all these formulas, because of the way the formulas work in Excel, as long as we know the range of our information, we can actually adapt that information. So the question always comes up is like, why is sum so appropriate? Why don't we just do equals this plus this plus this? And the answer is you come up with the same exact formula. There's not any difference. The problem then becomes is what if I change the formula? What if I change information? So if I go ahead and add a column here, and I'm going to add another homework assignment in the middle there, that doesn't adapt. That formula does not adapt. On the other hand, let me go back and redo everything I just did. Now I'm back to the sum formula. If I do the same thing, the sum formula is adaptive. All right. So that's the advantage of using formulas. I'm not going to say that formulas are going to be useful in every scenario, but in most situations where if you can use a formula versus using a manual calculation, it's going to be more worthwhile to use a formula. And that's the lesson here, is not saying that this is the correct way to use sum. It's more along the lines of, when we start thinking about formulas, especially those that use ranges, being able to adapt those ranges is very, very useful. So that's why we would want to use a formula. All right, now let's talk about something that's a little bit more relevant, okay? So we've already alluded to this. I talked about it last week. We talked about the nature of relative cell references. And what did I say about relative cell references? I said they're your best friend and also your worst enemy, okay? So relative cell references allow us to do a few cool things. So we can actually just copy this, and we can copy this down, and it will keep the form of the formula, but we'll adapt it to the new row. So this formula was focused on, it was focused on row 2. You'll notice this one changed to row 3, right? That's the beauty of relative cell references. Now, there are times when we do not want the relative cell references. We will need to make sure that things do not change, and we'll have to be very, very careful how we approach it. So the opposite of a relative cell reference is considered to be an absolute cell reference. That's basically where we say that we do not want a cell to change or a series of cells to change. And I'm sure you're already familiar with that. You all know the dollar signs that go in there. We also have situations where we have partial relative cell references. And what those mean is that we want the column to change, but the row not to change, or we want the column to stay the same, we want the row to change. That's where things get really, really hairy, but it also gets really, really fun when you can do adaptivity like that. And so we're going to get a little bit into that later in the semester, but it's important to know relative cell references create a lot of beauty in Excel, but a lot of difficulties if you don't understand how they work. All right, so real quick, I copied, and there are a few things that I can do. We already know copying, we can do that, and I could just continue hitting Control V. Alternatively, if I wanted to copy this, I could highlight the areas or the cells I want to copy it to. I could hit Control V for all of those. Or the final one, which I'm sure you already know, but I want to make sure we reiterate, it's one that I will use very frequently, is going to be clicking on this little black box down here. It's very hard to see, the little black thing down in the lower right-hand corner of the cell. If you double click that, it'll copy that formula. By the way, what is that called? Called autofill or flash fill, okay? So that's basically what a reference. When you hear me say autofill or flash fill, that's what I'm talking about. And that is probably the shortcut that I think most people use. The thing about autofill and flash fill is that it's very, very helpful, but you do have to have information in one of the adjacent columns or rows. So you can use this on both rows and columns as long as you have adjacent information. Like I couldn't do a flash fill right here. I don't believe I can. I've been surprised by what it would do. So if I say, I'm going to say equals this. So there's no adjacent information, it will not actually flash fill for me, despite the fact that it actually has representations in the cells that I referenced. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and let's do a few more things. Let's go ahead and we're going to add subtotal and extra credit in this total column. We're just going to copy that down, so we have totals. And let's do some cleanup. So one thing that I think is really, it's a lost skill, but I think it's a very important skill to have, is when you're working in Excel, is to make things look presentable. And I'm not going to necessarily insist upon that here in this classroom, because obviously we're not handing in Excel assignments. But more importantly, it's not necessarily something you have to do for other courses. I will say, those of you who are going to see me in auditing in a semester or two, you will have to experience Excel assignments where I'm going to tell you that formatting is a part of the presentation grade. It's part of the grade of the assignment. I do think a presentation is really important because you have to get in the habit of doing that in the real world. You're not going to hand an Excel file over that looks like this and say, well, this is what I put together. You want to make it look like somewhat presentable. So we're going to just do some basic stuff. And again, this is not because I think that it's difficult to do, but it's just good to get in the habit of doing that. So let's do a few things that are pretty basic. Let's highlight the first row. And since these are headers, let's go ahead and add a bold to them. Let's also go ahead and center the presentation. So I clicked on center there, so center the content. Also, it's important to note that this is centering across horizontally, but we can center vertically as well. So say, for example, that this is a much higher or much larger row, this much wider row. If I want to center the information across the center, I can do that as well. So all that listed there. Let's go ahead and make these columns. They're all currently listed. I think 8.43 is the default in Excel, which is really weird. 8.43. I'm just curious who settled on that. That's a default we can change, but that's kind of the Excel set default. So let's go ahead and adjust these. So what I'd like to do, we're going to click on this area right here. This is the keystone, which highlights the entire page. So we're going to highlight the entire page, and so we can fix this all at once. I just want you to click on any one of the columns, right, or double click on it, okay? It doesn't really matter which one when we highlight the entire page. Then that will set all of those. All right. Let's do one more thing. Two more things, actually. I want to go ahead and I want to highlight the information that this is a personal preference of mine, is that I highlight cells that are not manual inputs. So all this stuff under here is manual inputs. These are formulas, okay? So I like to highlight the ones that are formulas so I know which ones are going to be formulas are going to calculate automatically for me. By the way, something I just did, you may not have captured on. So I highlighted this, and then simultaneously I highlighted that. Does anybody know how I did that? Yeah, hit down control. Good, good. All right. Last thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and rename this. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can go rename a tab. Easy way is just double click and you can type in the name. What I often default to doing, even though I know that this is quicker, is I usually right click and then I go to rename. The only reason I get to habit of defaulting to right clicking is because there's a lot more options available to you when you highlight right click. You can see all of the different possibilities that you can actually do with respect to the tab. So I'm just going to rename. We're just going to rename this gradebook. All right. Everybody with me so far? Feeling good. All right, good. All right. So let's go over to this sheet right here. We're going to talk about the world of deleting. All right. And there's a lot of different ways you can delete information. Some of it is more permanent than others. Anybody play video games here, like the ones that say permadeath? Okay. You have to be very careful of permadeath in Excel because permadeath is a tragedy. That's where you start the game all over from the beginning. And there are certain ways that you can actually accomplish permadeath in Excel. So be very, very careful. So we're going to do something very basic. I'm just typing 1, 2, 3 here. All right. And you can follow along with me, but this is pretty straightforward stuff. Now, the three ways that you're primarily going to be deleting information is you're going to be deleting specific pieces of information within a cell or across a range or an array, whatever you want to call it. Then you're going to actually be deleting column and row information, and then there's deleting the entire worksheet, okay? And those three have different implications. So the first one is pretty straightforward. If I want to just delete the number 2, I highlight over that cell, and I hit the delete button. This just deletes information. It does not change the format of the Excel spreadsheet whatsoever. It just deletes anything that's in that cell. You can reorient it, do anything you want. On the other hand, if I want to delete column or row information, I can't just highlight the row and hit delete. I can, but all it's going to do is the same thing except across the row. It's just going to delete information. What if I want to completely delete that row? There's a few ways to go about it. My preferential way is to right click and go to delete here. And you might say, why is there delete when I can just hit the delete button? Well, these two deletes mean something different. Hitting delete on the keyboard will delete the information. Hitting delete here will delete the row. Now, this is not permadeath, by the way. You can actually just undo, and then you're good, okay? I'm good there. So, yeah, that's going to be the case right there. So you're going to do that. But if I want to delete the row, I delete that. Same holds true for the column. If I want to delete the column, I highlight the column, hit delete. I realized that it didn't do anything because it was a blank column, but I just wanted to show that that's possible. The final one is going to be deleting the worksheet itself. Okay, deleting and I say worksheet, I'm talking about specifically the tab, not the entire spreadsheet. Okay, not the entire workbook. So in this one is very specific. You go down here and you hit delete. Be very, very careful with this. This is where I'm talking about permadeath right here. If you do this and you don't, it's an accident, you're going to have trouble, especially in current generations of spreadsheets. The way that I still operate, you will notice that most of my times I have autosave off. The reason I do that is for this very reason right here, okay? If you have autosave on and you do what I'm about to do, there is no going back, okay? You're basically replicating. And I've done this more than once in my life, and it's not pleasant anytime I do it. One of those was very recently, and I felt like a fool. Because I basically deleted something, saved the workbook, and I was like, oh, crap. Yeah. So, yeah, have to be careful. So you're going to delete. It's going to say, are you absolutely certain? And this is a point in your life you should reconsider everything you've ever done, okay? You want to actually say, okay, do you want to delete this? If you're certain you're deleting, we're actually cool with this time. We're going to delete. Now, in this scenario, the way I've got it set up right now, if I say, oh my gosh, I did not want to delete that, I can back up and I could close my workbook. It would say save. I'd say no. And it would go back to the original format. And all I'd have to do is do all the work that I did here. If you've got autosave on, you're in a world of hurt, okay? So I cannot emphasize this enough. And there's going to be somebody in this room, probably multiple somebodies, who are going to experience this pain and loss. And I want you to remember my voice in your head. And I'm not taunting. I would say I feel sorry for you. I feel really bad for you because it's going to really, really hurt. It's going to suck. I hope it's a minimum amount of work that you have to do to restore that. My maximum so far was 5 hours of work that had to restore a deleted worksheet. Okay. And I deserved every minute of that 5-hour pain because of my arrogance. I was like Icarus flying to the sun, okay, thinking that I was immune. And then the wax melted, I came crashing to earth, okay, the wax being that extra spreadsheet. All right, a few things more that I want to talk about before we get done here. Let's go ahead and let's talk about some tools that I use for presentation. Some of these you're probably familiar with. So let's go over to View. Some of these are my favorite ones. By the way, these next few that I'm going to teach you, you're going to hear me say this a lot, okay? This is one of these examples that are very, very easy to do to make things look cool. But if anybody ever asks you how to do it, you do not tell them, okay? Do not give away our secrets, okay? You're like in a secret society now. You're joining the secret society. If I find out that you're spreading our secrets, that's where I have to call the assassins in, so I have to take you out so that you don't ruin our secrets here. All right, so yeah. This first one's going to be freeze panes. And freeze panes is pretty basic, straightforward. So if I want to keep, like say, for example, I've got more than 6 rows here. Like I've got 300 rows. But I want to keep my top row frozen so I can see what the headers are. I can actually just go over to freeze panes and I can say freeze top row. And you notice now that when I scroll through, it stays there. Which that's not all that impressive, okay? So I can do the same thing over in columns here. I can actually freeze the first column if I want to look at the first column, if I want to just look at that. Okay. And I'm sure everybody has probably used that before, freeze panes to some degree. What I really like freeze panes for, this is where it actually gets really cool, is if you want to freeze multiple things simultaneously, like more than one row or more than one column, or if you want to freeze both rows and columns. So let's say that I want to freeze the first 3 columns, the banner ID, last name and first name, and I want to freeze the top row. Is that even possible? Am I talking about things that are science fiction? Like something we haven't solved, like the 3-body problem? Yes. No, it's actually possible. Let's click on D2, okay? So this is actually the point where I say that we want to scroll through and want to actually adjust from this point right here, because this is below the first row and it's to the right of the first 3 columns. So we're going to go freeze panes, and we're actually going to click on the first item that says freeze panes, and now we have both frozen, okay? Our top row and our first 3 columns. Which, like I said, it's very, very simple. But when you show that to somebody who doesn't know what you're doing, they're going to think that's really, really cool. Speaking of things that people think was really cool, I'm going to show the last one, okay? This last one. This one's one that I actually didn't find out about until after I'd been using Excel for like 5 years. When I saw somebody do it, I said, whoa, you got to show me that. And they actually did, so I got in on the club. It was kind of cool. All right, so you'll notice here that in our grades, that for the most part, students are doing pretty well, okay? We do have a slow performer here, somebody who's not necessarily doing a very good job on the homework and did not do the extra credit. This is fine to do if you've got 6 students. What if you have like more than 6, like 60 students? Or in my extreme example, when I used to teach at my PhD's institution, I had 142 students in a class. It's really, really hard to identify whether somebody's performing well when you're looking at a spreadsheet of hundreds of names, okay? So let's go ahead and set a rule up for identifying that. What we're going to do is we're going to do some conditional formatting. So go back over to home, and we're going to go conditional formatting, and we're going to create a new rule. All right, so actually, let's do this one. Okay, I'm going to do format only cells that contain. I'm going to say cell value is less than, and we'll say 25, okay? And there's a few ways you can format this. My preferred way, and I will admit that there's some issues to this, okay? My preferred way is to go over to format, go to fill, and to put in a color. Now, obviously, it's a problem if you're talking about accessibility issues of color blindness. This is why there's multiple ways. I'm just showing you this way just because this is kind of what I default to. I already know that I'm going to curse myself by this, and that my vision is going to get worse over time, and it's never going to be relevant. 5 years ago, I didn't wear glasses, by the way, so that kind of shows you when I show you the stuff that not even adapting to my own circumstances. So let's go and click OK. Now, it's currently the value here is 35. What it's supposed to say here is if the value goes below 35, I want a red highlight to point up so I can actually be notified that this is a problem. So let's just manually over in cell I2, type in 20. And you will notice that now the red highlight comes up. It's conditionally formatted to do that. Now, like I said, there's any number of ways we could do this. We could actually do a bold or italicized format. We could actually put it in a different font, whatever it is. This is kind of my default that I've always worked with. The nice thing about conditional formatting is, like other cell references, it does operate with relative cell references. So we can just copy this down. And then our troublemakers highlighted right there. All right. So everybody feel pretty comfortable with that? All right, this is our first introduction. Like I said, some of it pretty straightforward, some of it a little bit more intuitive. Hopefully you pick up that. Like I said, hold on to your worksheets. That way you can work through them again as you're preparing for the exam. But for the most part, this is mostly for a learning activity for you to learn about some things that you may know or may not know about Excel and how to reinforce those. And like I said, if I'm going through any of this and it comes up that you have questions or just need me to repeat anything, feel free to let me know. This is mostly an activity for self-improvement in this area, and I think it's really important. All right. Now let's talk about some homework. So I had homework assignments and some pretty basic multiple choice questions along with a problem. So let's go ahead and burn through these multiple choice questions really quickly. We got 20 minutes, and I'd like to get through those so we can actually get to the problems. Let's start with number one. By the way, feel free to contribute if you want to. I don't insist upon this. This is not Socratic method. I'm not going to call anybody out to give an answer because I realize that there's uncertainty about the answers. But I will call out and kind of poll you to see if you don't know. And if you feel comfortable answering, great. If you don't, that's fine too. We will eventually get to the answer. So accounting information systems. This is a pretty straightforward one. By the way, I hate questions that are formatted like this because you have to read through all the answers. My ideal type of questions in this context is that when you read a multiple choice question, you have some idea of what you're looking for based on the context of the question. In this one, it could be anything. Well, it is what it is. Like I said, I will have some questions that I really like and some questions that I don't like, whatever it may be. All right. So accounting information systems, are they always computerized? No, okay. We've had accounting information systems as long as accounting has been in place, and computers have not always been a part of accounting, so we don't have to do that. Do they report only financially related information? No, that would be difficult given that accounting has become a quantitative and a non-quantitative discipline jointly. So we have information that's accounting related that's not necessarily financially related, okay? I know my financial major is about to get up and storm out of the room and say, I thought this was finance too, yeah, but no. It is both relevant, okay, and relevant to all disciplines. Are an information system that records, processes, and reports on transactions to provide financial and non-financial information for decision-making control. Now, other than the verb conjugation, is this a correct statement? Yes, okay. Yeah, that's exactly what we talk about with the financial system require. And then obviously CITP designation to understand. We haven't even talked about that. That's not relevant. So C is our answer. All right, moving down to question number 4. We talked about the value chain. Now, the correct order of events. Now, by the way, for the exam, I do expect you to know the order of events of the value chain. So make a note of that for studying and preparing for the exam. By the way, I do want to make a note of this because this does come up every semester. Some students are like, what's the best method for preparing for an exam? I strongly advocate preparing during the course of the semester. Do not wait till right before the exam and say, okay, I'm going to cram all this stuff in my head and some of it will be familiar, some of it will not. Part of the reason that I try to make the study guide and the practice exams available so early is so you can work on them now and see what it is you need to know for the exam as opposed to later. And so I have some enterprising students that encourage me to tell students that you can print out the study guide and say, all right, as we're going through the content in the chapters, what is in the study guide and what is it I specifically need to know? So I encourage you to do that if you've not already started doing that. If you haven't, then that's just a helpful tip. But this is one of those things that I will ask about is the order of events in the value chain. Obviously speaking, inbound logistics is going to be our first event, but what comes after inbound logistics? Well, we want to say outbound logistics, which does come next in sequence in the value chain. That is a correct statement. However, can we just take information and then immediately turn our data and immediately turn it into information? No, that's not the way things work. So when we talk about inbound logistics, there has to be a transformation process, whether that be actual products that we create as a company or whether that be data to information. There is some transformation. So that's going to be taken care of by operations. So inbound logistics and operations, and outbound logistics, C is our answer. All right, question number 6, a supply chain, another one of those questions. Supplies jewelry chains. All right, so it supplies jewelry chains, and Man, I can't go any further with this. Someday I'm gonna come up here with a straight face and I'm gonna actually go for this answer and I'm just gonna continue rattling on, but I can't do it. It's not supplying jewelry chains, although it's pretty clever. This is kind of so refers to the flow of materials, information, payments, and services. That sounds like a much better answer, and that is a factor answer. B. A similar function and purpose of the value chain. That is not correct. The value chain actually has something more to do with the value of operations, where a supply chain is the flow of goods and services, and does not apply to a service firm like an accounting firm. Would an accounting firm use a supply chain? Yeah, you would still have, you may not have traditional vendors, but you would still have vendors for some processes. But more importantly, supply chain is going to be the entire process. You still have customers in a service chain. So like we're talking about like an accounting firm, like KPMG, they would still have supply chain that they supply information to their customers. So there's still a supply chain. Even though we tend to identify the supply chain as being more associated with cost of goods sold, it does refer to the entire flow of goods and services from vendor to customer. All right. Question number 7. Customer relationship management software does not include information about what? Well, here's a very, very quick clue. If it says something about customers, that's likely going to be in customer relationship management software. What about current employees? Is this going to be customer management, relationship management software? Probably not. Probably not. There may be some employee information, but those are going to be big picture employees associated with that. All right, question number 10. The balance sheet account most likely affected by the AIS investment in supply chain management software would be what? There's a lot of questions that will come up with this nature, and so I want to make sure that we're clear on this now. When we talk about customer relationship management software, what do customers generally generate in an organization? What income statement accounts would you say that customers are most responsible for generating? Revenues, yeah, customers, we sell them stuff and they generate revenues, okay? When we talk about supply chain, usually it's about the flow of products and services, meaning that we have to acquire products and services. So those are going to be most responsible for generating cost of goods sold, all right? That's kind of a simplistic method of interpreting that. Now, is it going to be that clear every single time? No. But at the very basic level, I want you to think about it that way. Customers generate revenues. Vendors generate costs, or those cost of goods sold, okay? And those are going to be kind of the ancillary association for the information. There was a much deeper detail associated with that in the slides of chapter 1. It was the last slide in chapter 1 that goes into a lot more detail about the income statement accounts and what those associated with. But at the very fundamental level, I want you to remember at least those two, because those are going to be the ones that characterize everything else that creates in the financial statements. So AIS investment in supply chain management software would be what? Okay, so we said cost of goods sold. That was one thing that was associated with cost of goods sold. Assuming that we're not talking about a service-based business, what is cost of goods sold most usually associated with? Inventories, okay? So inventories would be our answer here. So again, everything is going to emanate from that basic concept, even though it can get a little bit more complex than that. As long as you remember supply chain management, customer resource management, revenues, supply chain management, cost of goods sold, it should be pretty easy to make the associations from that point right there. All right, question number 12. Customer relationship management software most likely to affect which income statement account? By the way, did we just talk about this? Yes, we did. All right. So what did we say that account was? Revenues. Okay, revenues. Okay, customers generate revenues. Question number 14. An auditor testing internal controls would most likely or generally be considered to fill which role with respect to accounting information system? So this talks about two of my favorite things: auditors, because I teach auditing, and internal controls, because internal controls are great. Okay, internal controls are quite possibly the best thing ever, which is a direct statement that I once made, believe it or not. All right, so auditors testing internal control, they're trying to make sure that your responses to risks in the organization are appropriate. That's actually a responsibility of the auditor. What does that sound like to you? If they're actually testing something, what's another word for testing? Evaluation. Okay, so they're evaluators. Okay, so they're evaluators in this scenario. Which of these represent proper transformations? Number 15. Which of the represent proper transformation data decision according to the information value chain? Okay, so we know that data immediately transfers to information because it can't actually have any relevance unless it becomes information. The information is what drives the value, and then information can be used for subsequent purposes. Okay, in this particular context, we're talking about it to gain knowledge and using that knowledge to make a decision. But the key point here is to say that data transforms directly to information. And there's only one possibility that we can actually see data transitioning to information. That's A, all right? The rest of this is important, but not necessarily it's not necessary to be able to answer this question. All right, let's go over to chapter 2, multiple choice questions. Question number 1. Which of the following is not a role of the accounting function in business? All right. Let's just go through the answers. Financial close, is that a role of accounting? Yes. Regulatory compliance? Yes. Project management? Yes. Using IT to make finance and accounting processes more efficient? Yes. All of the above? Yes, that's the answer. All right. By the way, make a note of this. There will be a lot of times in the book that will all of the above will be the correct answer. I don't want you to get in the habit of that on the exams. All of the above is rarely the correct answer on my exams. Okay. In fact, I would say it's about 1 out of 4 times it's the correct answer, considering that there are 4 options in every question. It's about 1 of 4 times. Okay. So be very, very careful when you see all of the above. It is not a default answer on the exams. It may be a default answer in the homework. It is not a default answer on the exams. Okay. I won't say that I never use all of the above. I will say that I use it infrequently. Okay. Roughly 25% of the time. All right. Moving on to question number 6. Which of the following symbols used to represent a gateway in BPMN? So gateways are really important. They actually represent decisions. We open a gateway, we close a gateway. What does that shape look like? The diamond, it's B, okay, it's B. Which one of the symbols represents a sequence flow in BPMN? So sequence flow is actually a transition from one activity to the next. So I'm going to ask you a question that was not asked on the homework, and then I'm going to ask you a question that is. Which one of these is an activity symbol? A is a triangle, or the triangle, the rectangle. Know my shapes, okay? We're going back to first grade. Yeah. So a rectangle is the activity flow, and then the sequence flow that shows this representation is going to be D. That's the arrow. Okay, it shows this flow. Question number 11. Which of the following best describes message flows? Okay, so message flows are continuous within each pool. Is that a correct statement? No. Message flows are modeled with solid arrows. Not necessarily, okay? Not necessarily. Message flows represent exchanges between pools. Yes, that's a correct statement. If they cannot cross pool boundaries or lane boundaries, it kind of defeats the purpose of them being able to move between pools. So D and E are by default not a correct answer, so we have C as the answer. All right. That's multiple choice questions for this. We're going to come back here in just a second, but let's go ahead and move on to our problems. Oh, quick note on this. This comes up every single semester. Please note when I use the problems come after the discussion questions. There's a series of discussion questions and problems, and because of the way the book works, they number them the same thing. So it may be able to do a problem, and you may look nothing like what you answered. Okay, if that's the case, not a big deal. I'm not going to count you off on homework for making that mistake. Be very, very careful though when you look at future homework problems to make sure that you know you're doing discussion questions or problems, because I do use both depending on the homework assignment. In this case, we're doing problems, so we're going to move from here to here. All right. So let's go ahead and quickly do this. We're running out of time, so I'm going to go through this much quicker than I'd like to, okay? So that's the value chain activity in the left column and scenario in the right column. So service activities. Service activities, remember, service activities relates to any work that has to be done with respect to the goods and services you provide. An example of this would be warranty work, so B, okay? Inbound logistics, that would be something where we receive materials or receive data. That would be a good example of receiving doc for raw materials. Marketing sales activities, okay? What is something that marketing sales people do? They're trying to actually generate customer interest, so probably surveys for prospective customers would be correct. So 3 is A. Firm infrastructure. Firm infrastructure would be the example of the support activities, and the biggest support are going to be the people who run the organization, like the CEO and CFO. So G. Human resource management. We know human resource management is responsible for getting our employee pool, our labor force, so worker recruitment, all right? Technology is pretty blunt, but what are we talking about technology? Remember, technology is an evolutionary process in an organization. And as trends change in the external world, a company has to keep up with that. So we want to make sure we have new products that can actually keep up with that. So new product development would be technology. Procurement. Procurement is pretty straightforward by definition. It's buying and sourcing, okay? Which in this case, we're saying raw materials would be an example of those things we buy. Outbound logistics are going to be the actual manufacturing of the process, okay? The actual delivery of the goods. My apologies, the actual delivery of the goods. So we're going to be outbound logistics and delivery to the firm's customers. So D. And then operations. Operations are going to be the actual change from inbound to outbound, the transformation that takes place. From an information standpoint, we talk about information from data to information. From goods, we talk about the transition from raw materials to finished goods. How we do that? The assembly line, which can be C. You guys feel pretty good about that? All right, let's do it one more time just for fun, okay? By the way, this next one, there's a lot of straight lines here. They go straight across. I think that's kind of cheesy, but it is what it is. All right. So customer call center. Customer call center is an example of a service activity. So we say G. All right. Supply schedules. All right. We need to know what's going to be happening so we can plan inbound logistics. So 2 goes to B. That's our first straight line, by the way. Order taking. Well, order taking represents a traditional sales function, so that probably relates to marketing and sales activities. So we're going to be I. Our accounting department is going to be something that supports the operations organization. Those crazy kooky accountants that actually make sure that we get our job done. In this context, they're firm infrastructure. So they're D. Staff training. Staff training is going to be human resource management. So we've got our straight line. So 3 straight lines now. Research and development, technology. So 3 straight lines in a row now, 4 total. And then verifying quality of raw materials. Well, keep in mind, raw materials is generally going to be part of the procurement process. So that would be something we'd want to do in the procurement process. Traditionally speaking, it's not the definition, but that would be something that we'd have to do as an additional step in procurement. Distribution center, that's outbound logistics, so another straight line. And then manufacturing is part of operations. So 9 is A. All right. Last thing we're going to talk about is we're going to be talking about a BPMN diagram. Now, I did cheat, okay? I did copy this from the solutions manual. These are not difficult to do, but to be honest, it was just too large that I didn't want to put it together, and I was running out of time because I was listening to something else. But I did want to show you what the diagram looks like according to the information in the book. I think this is a pretty fun diagram to talk about. This is an interesting approach to this. So let's just go ahead and we're going to read through the narrative, and then we're going to look at the diagram to make sure we understand how everything works, okay? So Larry awoke to the alarm clock buzz. He got dressed for the day. All right. So here's kind of the event. The alarm clock buzz, the alarm sounds. That's our starting event. Okay. And remember, the starting event is that circle, just this straight up circle. Then he's got an activity, getting dressed for the day. Then he ate a hearty breakfast of oatmeal toast, orange juice, and coffee. Does anybody have that big a breakfast for? I'm assuming some of the athletes and student athletes do, but yeah, mine is kind of like an egg McMuffin. Okay. I don't eat very healthy. Probably should. Anyway. Hearty breakfast. So if you said eat breakfast, that's fine. If you said eat hearty breakfast, that's technically more accurate. Okay. All right. Grabbed his books and prepared to leave for school. So preparing for school. Before you left home, he checked the weather. It looked like rain. So we actually talked about this. We actually said if this is going to be something that we're going to be concerned about, we need to understand that as adults, we need to be aware of what our external environment is. So he's checking the weather. And if it's rain likely, he puts on a jacket and takes the umbrella. If it's sunny, skips the jacket and umbrella, walks to school in class. And notice that if it's rain, then he drove to school, okay, which I think a lot of people can relate to, especially if your walk is pretty long. You're going to be like, I'm going to park in the commuter lot. If it's going to be rain, just so I don't have to spend as much time in the rain. So park and walk to class, but walk to school in class. What is one thing that's characteristic of this particular situation? Really doesn't matter how you characterize the activities. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But one of the most important things, one thing the book does not do consistently, but I will harp on you to do for every assignment, close your gateway, because we had a decision gateway here. We had rain likely, or if it's sunny. Those are 2 different decision points. If it's rain, then the decisions change than if it's sunny, okay? By the way, I think right here, you don't have to put activity, a skip jacket or umbrella. You could just say, I'm going to walk to school in class. You're just going to leave the house just as you are, but you probably need to specify that you get the jacket and take the umbrella under the decision that rain does occur. Also that you're driving to school. And then, yeah, moving from there. So you could actually characterize this in 2 activities and this one down as 1 activity. Regardless, the most important point here is to identify the decision tree. So at that point, once you get to school, the decision closes and the event ends because you're actually in class. And then you have to listen to talking about customer relationship management software and supply chain management software and stuff like that. And things you already know how to do in Excel. But again, this is a pretty simple and straightforward BPMN diagram. We will have more examples of this, especially once we get to the business process areas. If you work close to this, pat yourself on the back. If you work close to this, make sure that you document what this should look like, and you can correct this for future iterations of it. Have a good weekend. I will see you all on Monday.